Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ryan Miles, and today I'll be covering the IT security risk assessment recently conducted by my firm, Government Security Consultants, on the organization BRI, the Bureau of Research and Intelligence. We'll start out by looking at the current security situation at BRI before we look at the risk assessment methodology, plan, and findings. And finally, we'll look at the security recommendations we're going to make and wrap up with some conclusions. BRI processes mission information that must be kept completely confidential. This can prove particularly difficult in this dynamic, rapidly changing environment where new threats are emerging daily. To make matters worse, BRI is subject to congressional budget restrictions, which force its leaders to be selective in the measures and controls they implement to ensure cost effectiveness based on a sound risk assessment. In response to several recent security breaches, the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, conducted a comprehensive review of BRI's security controls. As numerous issues were identified during the investigation, the head of BRI challenged my company, GSC, with an IT security risk assessment in order to address security gaps and determine actions necessary to close these gaps. The table you'll see here lists the incidents which led to the GAO review. A risk assessment is made up of many moving parts, assumptions, constraints, uncertainties, and the risk assessment methodology sort of pulls them all together, allowing the assessor to form the risk assessment process and model and the assessment and analysis approach. This can be seen visually in the chart here. GSC's methodology consisted of 5 steps. Number 1, identify the threats. 2, identify vulnerabilities. 3, analyze the risks. 4, identify recommended corrective actions. And 5, document these results. As part of the risk assessment plan, we laid out a scope that determined that the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of each component would be thoroughly investigated and classified. The risk assessment will be limited to BRI's electronic information systems, network access control, physical access control, and role-based access control. Outside of the scope of this risk assessment plan, it was determined during the planning phase that it was any flaws in physical structure, structural boundaries, inherent defects, and any software or hardware owned by BRI or third parties, and any electronic information systems owned by any party or other than BRI, including their vendors and subsidiaries, will be excluded from the assessment. Also included in the planning phase, the risk model, which helps the organization determine when something exceeds a certain threshold of risk. Details of the risk model for our assessment can be found in the interim planning report. Here's a quick snapshot here on the screen. Now, executing the plan led to our risk assessment findings, and in order to clearly express the significance of the findings, security inadequacies were broken down into the following subcomponents that you see here: threat sources, vulnerabilities, threat events, and predisposing conditions. This bar chart on the side here shows the number that were reviewed. BRI was found to have majority of adversarial threat events as opposed to the non-adversarial threat events occurring throughout the organization. As you can see in the figure here, of the 6 total events, 5 were deemed adversarial and only 1 is accidental. Vulnerabilities are assessed based on quantitative values that measure severity, likelihood, impact, pervasiveness, and risk of the vulnerability or threat. This figure illustrates how each of the 18 vulnerabilities scored during the assessment, ranging from low through moderate and high to very high. A predisposing condition is a condition that exists within the organization, a mission, or business process, which affects the likelihood that threat events, once they're initiated, actually result in adverse impacts to the organization, operations, or assets. This figure portrays the pervasiveness of the predisposed conditions identified during the assessment, again from moderate to very high. The real meat of this assessment is producing recommendations to help BRI become stronger and have a stronger security posture. A few key things popped out. Number one, security awareness and training. Really, a security awareness program will enable BRI to improve the security posture by offering employees the knowledge they need to better protect the organization's information through proactive security conscious behavior. Training should cover proper procedures for computers, tablets, and mobile devices, and also require a minimum score before being allowed to move on. In order to implement a strong privacy protection program, BRI should invest in systems which better protect the organization's data. Process-driven encryption encrypts data no matter where it's stored, but it's significantly faster and easier to manage than full disk encryption. GSC recommends that BRI take data store backups before and after daily processing and store them off-site on a removable storage device that can be encrypted. And then in the event of a disaster, that database could be mounted to a rebuilt server in a matter of hours, depending on the natural disaster. This will enhance and help with business continuity and disaster recovery. In conclusion, BRI's mission is critical to the interests of the United States, and therefore its information technology security must be made a priority. It's GSC's belief that, armed with these findings and recommendations produced from this risk assessment, BRI is poised to make great strides towards securing their enterprise. Bureau leadership will be faced with tough decisions, but they must remember that the organization and the nation are relying on them to help us keep the world safe for democracy.